Shh. Be very, very quiet. We're hunting mufflers. Hi everyone, Ron Spomer Outdoors with silencers. You've been asking for it? We're going to deliver it. We've got an expert. Drew Mills knows all about gun mufflers, silencers, suppressors. We call them a lot of different things, including cans for an obvious reason. But we want to understand, Drew, is what makes these things work. Now, we understand that Hiram Maxim, a gentleman from way back, patented the gun muffler and the automobile muffler roughly at the same time. He called them the Maxim silencer, if I remember right. That was around 1909 or so. And here we are, more than 100 years later, and we're finally getting around to using these on our firearms. And I mean, why not? It shuts the noise down, same as on a motorcycle or any other combustion engine, right?
Right. Important thing, I think, is defining what it does, right? It might have started as a silencer, and that might have been the goal with Maxim. But there's a couple factors. It's not just sound reduction, but signature reduction as well.
Signature reduction, what do you mean by that?
So you get a flash coming out of the muzzle, depending on your muzzle device. There's flash suppressants, you know, flash hiders, all sorts of things. But essentially what the silencer does is mitigate flash, mitigate sound, but it's overall signature reduction to help you stay concealed.
Now, is recoil reduction part of the equation?
Yes. So it is essentially a giant brake.
Equal to what a brake would do for you?
Depends on the silencer. All of them have different geometries, different lengths, different sizes, but the larger it is, the more perpendicular surface you get. And obviously in most silencers now you have a conical shape on the interior, but you are getting some assistance with recoil because that gas is running into all these perpendicular angular surfaces.
So can you hold one of these up for our audience and show the parts and kind of describe what's going on when a bullet and especially, I guess, the gases behind the bullet are going through it?
Yes. So what happens is fire the round, it exits the muzzle. And what happens is you have all this pressure built up behind it. So all this uncorking pressure, and that makes its way through the silencer and out into the environment. Now, typically without a silencer, that is a very violent, hot, high pressure gas that is being released instantaneously to the environment. So it's hot, which combusts. So you get flash. It's loud. So you get sound, sub or supersonic, it doesn't matter, it's still incredibly loud. The point of the silencer is to slow that down. So it's both cooling gases, so that by the time they exit the end of the silencer, the gases are now cooler and less likely to combust in the environment, which mitigates the flash. And then the slow release of pressure contains that pressure so that once the pressure is released to the environment, it's not the uncorking pressure at the barrel, it's a lower pressure, so it's quieter.
Okay, so I think we could say it's similar to, say, a balloon full of air. Pop it with a pin, big bang, but if it's a deflated balloon, it's less of a big bang.
That is a perfect analogy.
Okay,
yes.
Good. Now, why all these baffles? How do you decide how many baffles, and how is the air flowing in these? Or is it just to create space and slow it down so it has to work its way up and back and around and all that? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, so the idea behind multiple baffles is each step is another pressure differential. So every time you add a baffle, you are adding another orifice that is, or another surface that is redirecting gas and slowing it down. So how many baffles you said defines, it depends on what your purpose is. If the purpose is to be lightweight, you can do well with less baffles to keep weight down in, say, a hunting package. But, you know, if you're going to the range and you're just plinking all day and you want the best thing for your ears, then you might not mind the weight and more baffles.
Okay, so the more baffles, the quieter it's going to be, the longer, the more volume. It's just a volume thing, huh?
Typically, volume and baffles will reduce sound. Now, you get into some stuff with subsonic and supersonic rounds, you might be able to get away, you know, you might have very similar sound in supersonic with, say, a 4-baffle can and an 8-baffle can, if they're the same length, because at that point volume is typically more important. But when subsonic, you know, when you're getting into subsonic pressures, gas is moving a lot slower, and typically more baffles in subsonic creates better sound. So a 4-baffle can might be a great supersonic sound, might make it hearing safe enough that you're okay out in the field shooting 1 or 2 shots. But if you're at the range all day,
Then you want
it
more.
might not. But that 4-baffle cannon subsonic might be very loud.
Might be loud, huh?
Compared to the same silencer with many more baffles.
Many more, okay. So I guess a hunter then has to compromise size, weight, and how much sound reduction he wants.
It's all about what is your goal in mind. Yeah.
How does somebody decide that? You go to hey, I need a silencer or a muffler or whatever you want to call it for my hunting rifle. Let's say it's a 270 or 243.
Yeah.
How does the buyer go into the shopping and understand that stuff? What do you look for?
Again, it's defined by what you're doing. So if you're going out hunting, are you, hunting from a tree stand or a blind? You might be okay with a heavier, longer silencer. Sound reproduction might be more important so you don't spook off a deer if you miss a shot, or if there's multiple deer, you might be able to take follow-up shots. But if you're going to be backpacking, hunting goats in New Zealand up in the mountains, then you probably want a shorter, smaller silencer that is going to, yes, help reduce sound, reduce your signature up in the mountains, but you don't necessarily want to carry all that extra length. It starts snagging on branches, brush, or the weight that slows you down and tires you out.
Now, obviously, we have different barrel diameters on our rifles, so you're going to have to screw this on to the barrel. And I see here, it looks like you've got some that have adapters for turning it on. You get flat nut surface on here to tighten it onto your barrel, but can you use the same can on different diameter barrels?
It's all about the caliber of the barrel, and typically there is industry standards for different calibers and different muzzle threads for said calibers. So typically it's organized in there, and you'll have a couple variations of threads per caliber.
So you need to buy the threads to match your muzzles threads.
Yes, and then we also offer different products. So we have direct thread cans that'll go directly onto your muzzle thread, which is better for dispersion, because you now don't have a barrel connected to a muzzle device then connected to a silencer. You start running into alignment issues. The more things you stack up in a row, all of a sudden you start to worry about alignment. So the best thing for dispersion and accuracy and weight is going to be putting the silencer directly on your barrel.
So this, to me, looks like it's the direct mount one.
This is the larger one, so that actually goes on to our cherry bomb. So that is our QD brake that you can put on, and that is growing in popularity. We have these hub compatible on the back. So
on this one, you can take the hub off and change its diameter to fit a different barrel?
Yes.
Still use
so
the same
you
silencer?
can either use this specific one is for our muzzle brake. And then the muzzle brake comes in different barrel threads to accommodate all your different threaded rifles. Or you can swap it out for a direct thread if you would like to dedicate it directly to a specific gun. So this just gives you more modularity. Yeah,
there you go. All right, now I want to get over to these cones. These are, I assume, the internal we're seeing right here.
Yes. Yep. Those are two of our baffles.
Is there any particular reason for the geometry? Does it just have to be a cone, or does the slope matter? I notice there's some little holes drilled in the sides. What's going on with that?
So cone angle is something that is a factor. The steeper the cone, the better, but then you start running into a length issue. You make that cone too steep, obviously you can go to infinity and then it's just a tube and then it's useless. If you go perpendicular, it's got better braking, but it's going to be worse for sound. So there's a balance there, and the cone angle is kind of, they're around, I'd say 60 degrees has been determined as the optimum cone for a straight cone. And then there's plenty of different profiles that are not necessarily conical. But all the things have been tried over the years, and cones are relatively easy to produce and very effective. And then as far as the other geometries in it, that's more of an iterative process depending on the specific silencer. So this relief cut right here in the middle, that is what we call a jet cut. And what that does is create asymmetry within the can. So you create asymmetry and you start pushing gases in different directions.
And you want to do that.
And that helps slow down the gas ahead of it. So what happens in uncorking is the barrel comes out and immediately the gases is all around. It immediately goes around the bullet and down the suppressor.
So the gas is ahead of the bullet.
Yes.
Most of it.
And then what the jet cuts do is allow gas to go perpendicular to the axis, and it interrupts air going through and slows down air.
Okay.
So
but does that affect your bullet then? I'll get that air moving at it from all different directions.
It does.
Going to make it inaccurate, or
it can, and that's part of the thing when you optimize. You find a balance between dispersion and sound. So the jet cuts are better for sound, creating more asymmetry in the can. More turbulence is better for sound. Helps slow down the gases more. And then at a certain point, yes, that gas is pushing on the bullet. And depending on the caliber, you go down in bullet size. Smaller bullets, higher pressures, they have more of effect on the bullet.
Oh, sure.
So you always get a POI shift, point of interest shift between a naked muzzle and a silencer, because those gases are affecting the trajectory. And it's just a balance of what you're okay with.
Is there a general consensus on using a suppressor to improve on average your accuracy or make it worse? So the average guy says, I'm going to put one on, but I know I'm going to lose a half MOA of my accuracy, or probably going to gain a half MOA. What side would it fall on in general?
Typically, we have a dispersion requirement on our end that varies depending on the caliber of the silencer that we will not compromise. So we might find that the most optimum sound performing silencer has too much of an effect on the bullet, and dispersion is no longer acceptable. But typically, by the time it actually gets to production and released, we find little to no difference, or it does improve. There is the theory out there that what you're essentially doing, since the bullet is contained for longer, and yes, it's exposed to all the gases in here, and yes, I say asymmetry, but the pressure still is rather uniform, and it's not exposed to the outside elements for longer. So there is the theory that you are essentially extending your barrel length.
Even though the bullet's not touching the lands, you're extending the barrel.
You're not actually
out in the open
increasing your buildup of pressure in that sense of extending barrel length, but you are lengthening the time that the bullet gets to the environment, which is typically beneficial for.
I have noticed that I haven't shot a lot with suppressors, but generally when I use one, my accuracy will improve.
Yes, and that is the theory behind it, is that you are protecting that bullet for longer.
Okay,
and allowing it to.
As a hunter, and I'm going shopping for a silencer, I am going to want one that is at least the caliber of the bullet I'm shooting, but you can get a bigger one. So in other words, if I'm shooting a 22 and a 24 and a 28 and a 30, I could buy a 30 and handle all of those?
Yeah.
They fit on my barrels?
There are a couple, as far as maybe it can't handle the pressure, but typically, yes, anything that will fit through the hole, if it's rated for, and smaller, will work.
Okay. What will you be sacrificing or giving up if you use a 30 caliber can on a 22?
Typically sound.
Just sound is going to be louder.
Now, maybe not 22, that specific example, because it's so quiet anyways that the volume will help. But essentially what you're doing is you now have a big hole that is unnecessary, and you could make that hole smaller, which would actually slow down the release of gas. So the bigger that hole is, at some point, obviously it's so big that it does nothing.
Wow.
But if it's too small, you run into issues with production baffle strikes. But
now, we already talked about shopping for size, for convenience. You're going to modulate your sound, but you don't want to get it so big that clumsy, you don't want to hunt with it. So you're going to keep the length down. Typically in a hunting can, you're looking at 6 inches, 7 inches. How short can you go and still be effective for protecting your ears mainly?
You can go pretty short. So the jumbo shrimp we have is our 6.5 and smaller caliber.
Okay.
It's a little bit shorter than that. That is our half Nelson. So the trash panda is a little bit shorter than that, and it is hearing safe.
This is just a piece. It's not a whole unit.
But that's actually about the length of it.
That's about the length of it.
So you can get down to 4 inches. Some of these new 5.56 cans, which are loud because their flow through, are much shorter.
Okay.
But, you can get it pretty short and still be hearing safe.
So if I were shopping, I would say, look, I want a can that is no longer than 6 inches, because I just don't want to have a longer barrel than that when I'm out hunting. I'd like to knock about 25 or 30 decibels of sound off to protect my hearing. Does that sound reasonable? You could ask for that when you're shopping?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the weight, whether it's aluminum, steel, titanium, what other metals do you use in making these?
Again, depends on the function. So obviously titanium is light. but you need more of it because it's not as strong. But typically the equation still works out that you can make a lighter titanium
A little bit
silencer.
lighter with titanium.
But what you do get with that is spark. So titanium is combustible. You can ignite it. So some of that unburned powder coming out and the gases will actually pull off a little bit as the baffles
So you get
erode.
some spark coming out.
You get some spark coming out. So if your focus is flash suppression, titanium might not be the silencer for you. Steel is better for that. And then steel, we also use Inconel, which is just a high nickel content steel. And that is very heat resistant. So if you have a caliber, say in 5.56, very high pressure, get very hot, they run fast. For durability of the silencer, to protect the silencer and make sure that you don't grow your hole size over time, which is erosion.
All right, you mentioned durability. How long is a can going to last? I've wondered that myself. Are you going to fill this thing up with powder after 1,000 shots or fewer, or can you clean them? And how long will they last?
Typically, I'd say you're running a 30 caliber silencer, you're shooting supersonic rounds through it. The pressures are so high that it'll actually clean itself. So it'll clean most of the carbon out. And it all depends on your shooting schedule. You can start going full auto on it, and eventually the thing is going to get too hot to handle it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You get so much gases. It's which one's going to die first, the gun or the silencer? You know, you can get way to the extreme end and get way too hot. And on the other end, I shoot one shot a day. That can's never going to die. It will last absolutely forever. So it's a balance of the two, and you try to look at what is the typical application of it. So a silencer that can go on a semi-automatic or a bolt action, you're going to want to focus on the semi-automatic side of high volume shooting to make sure that it survives. But right now we've been running 6 to 8 mag schedules on these.
What do you mean by 6 to mag schedule?
So we have a shooting cadence, 1 round a second, 2 round a second, depends on the caliber.
Okay.
Sometimes we alternate, but you start doing torture testing and putting high temperatures on it. It's something above and beyond what the typical shooter would do.
Yeah.
I'm shooting the gun, I actually did it yesterday. I didn't have my shooting glove on and my trigger finger, and I burned my finger because the lower receiver and the trigger got so hot. It was I think it was oil. The oil ran down and onto my finger. But we run them well beyond, what is comfortable to shoot.
Yeah.
And we do that for multiple cycles, and we start looking at the sound degradation over time and see, after 5,000, after 10,000 rounds of torture, how much did your sound change? Because you started to erode, heat up, slowly erode the baffles, which makes the hole bigger. And I said earlier, a larger hole.
But that's extreme stuff.
Yeah. And that's why we do it on our end, to ensure that the shooter on their end, with any normal shooting, typical, weekend shooter course, yes, you're running a lot, but you're not typically running the gun so hot you can't hold it in your hand.
Yeah. And in a typical sporting hunter, even if someone's shooting varmints or some fairly high volume, you're not going to be running that many rounds through it. And a deer hunter, the few times you shoot, that can would last you a lifetime.
Yeah, and there is the argument at some point you get so hot that your barrel's no longer functioning well, and the barrel has to cool. Right. And once you get to that point, your gun's already useless anyways. Yeah. So
you don't have to clean them if it's a high pressure round, like a 30-06, 270, 243.
But you can, drop it in ultrasonic if you want to try to knock some stuff out of it, depending on the material. But you can't put these in an ultrasonic. I
want to get to what that is on this handgun, because that to me looks like something different. Before I do that, though, I want to get with the 22 rimfire. I mean, a lot of guys like to shoot really quiet with the 22 rimfire for hunting squirrels, especially. I'm thinking of doing
I do it myself. Yep.
Oh, yeah?
I got a groundhog problem. I got 8 so far, but
real quiet.
Yeah, 22 running all day.
You can use a fairly small can with a 22, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 22, as far as suppressors go, the difficulty of design really comes down to how light do you want it to be. But as far as sound, it is very easy to quickly get past the gun's capability. So you can make the 22 silencer so quiet that the action is actually louder than the silencer. So the action's probably around 105 to 110 decibels. And at some point, the bullet exiting is quieter than that, and you're limited by your system.
Yeah. So if you're shooting a Ruger 1022 autoloader, you're hearing the slap clang function of the action.
Right. So then if you have a bolt action closed, then you could go for a longer, like our Erector 22. It's a little bit longer. You can really stretch that sound performance out.
Nice. Yeah. Now, do they get dirty sooner though? 22 fairly dirty rimfire?
22, the pistol calibers, they're all dirty.
So do you have to clean those, run some solvent through them or what?
You do. So in our Erector 22 aluminum silencer, we recommend CLP, KG1, and a brush. Typically a brass brush or a nylon brush, something that is softer than the anodized so that you don't remove the anodized from the aluminum. So our aluminum baffle components, threaded baffles, have anodized type 3 hard coat. And if you throw that in an ultrasonic, certain solvents will actually eat the anodized and weaken your baffles.
No, you're talking about getting inside of the can to clean it?
So on this particular one, this is our 9mm version, but we have a 22 version. All of these thread apart with a tool, so you can take each one apart and clean each one.
Each one of these little junctions right here can come apart?
Correct.
And then you get inside and clean everything up?
Yep.
Pretty sweet.
And then on our other 22, which is a fixed tube with a threaded end cap, you thread the end cap out, and all of these are individual baffle components that stack and lock into one another and then are clamped together with that end cap. And same thing, you unscrew the cap, those are all steel, so you can toss those right in the ultrasonic. But
nice.
You can, just disassemble your tube, dump your baffles out, clean them, and stack them back in.
Now, somebody here told me that this was something special with auto-loading handguns.
Yes.
The barrel tilts up when you fire, and this is going to cause a problem. What's going on with that?
So this is a Nielsen device. Don't quote me on when it was developed. I can't remember off the top of my head. But essentially what it is a floating piston system so that the silencer acts independently from the barrel. So when you shoot floating barrel, a fixed barrel system, you do not need this because the recoil is already through the gun and it does not affect the silencer. But when you add all this extra weight out to the end of your pistol in something that requires the movement of the barrel in order to recoil, you don't want to add that weight to the barrel. It's just a conservation of momentum and mass and energy equation.
Gotcha.
So this barrel needs to go backwards in order to it goes backwards and down in order for the gun to recoil. You add too much weight, it's too heavy, and it can't beat the pressure. So what actually happens is that the gun recoils independently from the silencer. So this is a piston, and this is essentially your muzzle device. The piston threads into your barrel. Oops, sorry, my finger's in the way. It threads into the barrel, and then in here is a spring component contained within a sleeve so that the silencer will move independently from the barrel, allowing the gun to recoil, and then it'll eventually pull and catch back up.
Got it. Phew. There's a lot more to these silencers than I ever imagined.
Yeah.
And when someone say, hey, put a can on the end of it, you just think you're sticking a can on the end of it.
Fundamentally, they're quite simple, right? It's a bunch of cones all put together in a big tube, and it makes everything quiet.
Yeah.
But once you start getting into the intricacies of what you want out of it, that's when it gets complicated.
Yeah, well, I was glad you were here to explain it to us because I would have never been able to handle this one. So I'm not sure I could handle it even now after my lesson, but we can always go back to the tape. But it's really fascinating to understand this. Now, how many of these do you sell? Are they getting to be really popular? Aren't
they are, and now with ATF wait times dropping down, so the initial problem was you pay the tax stamp, which is $200, and then it was typically average 10-month wait time to get your silencer. And now those wait times are cut down as short. I've seen as short as 14 hours. Some people are saying online.
Wow.
Those are some extremes, but typically now it's down to a week, 2 weeks.
Now, speaking of that tax stamp, a little confusion about that. Is that a one stamp for all the silencers you ever want to get, or you'd have to have one for every silencer you buy?
Every silencer that you get is an NFA item, and each one gets its own tax stamp. So every NFA item that you want.
That gets kind of pricey.
Yes, it can add up pretty quick. And that is why the popularity of the hub compatible and the quick devices or the QD muzzle devices versus the direct thread is popular because some people cannot get a dedicated can for each of their systems.
Yeah.
I'd say that's ideal. And if it were me, I would like to build out my gun as a system and leave it set up. But if you can only afford one silencer in 30 cal and you have all these 30 cal and lower devices, you can now just buy the cheaper muzzle device component and use one silencer across all of them.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys will be doing that.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I think that about handles it. Is there anything that you think I need to know or we need to know that we haven't covered?
No, I think we covered a lot.
What do you guys got any questions? All right, Drew Mills. I want to thank you for visiting with us. Drew is with Hugh. That is the name of a rifle manufacturer and apparently a silencer manufacturer. How many different models of these do you make?
Right now, I believe we have 12, and then that is the 13th. And then we got, more coming down the way. We'll have who knows how many pretty soon.
Crazy.
We're working on building out our line to, cover more niche calibers and just get a broader product line on the market to cover everyone's needs.
All right, something to look forward to here. And as we're moving forward, we're covering a lot of these new technologies in firearms, which is not my strong point because I'm the old fud, but some exciting things happening. And I think this is one of the big ones, guys. So I think there's going to be a suppressor in your future. Shh, don't tell anybody. This is Ron Spomer. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Hunt honest and shoot straight and quietly.